April 14, 1943. North Atlantic Ocean, 600 miles south of Iceland. The sea was black and restless beneath the sky, with no moon. Waves rolled like slow, breathing muscles of cold water, slapping against the unseen steel of a U.S. capital warship moving without lights. No running lamps. No signal flares. Only darkness and the low thunder of the engines pushing forward through hostile waters. The air smelled of oil, salt, and cold metal. Every man on deck felt it. This was a night meant for sinking. Below the waterline, deep inside the steel ribs of the ship, the hull groaned as it cut through the Atlantic swell. The sound was not loud, but it never stopped. It was the sound of pressure, of weight, of the ocean testing the ship with every mile. Down in the engine spaces, where heat clashed with the cold seeping through the hull, sailors whispered a rumor that no officer would confirm. They said this warship was different. They said its steel was forbidden. Steel no regulation approved. Steel buried inside classified reports and locked behind doors with armed guards. Steel that was never meant to touch open seawater. They said the ship carried something the Navy never wanted history to see. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe now to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us where you are watching from around the world. Your location, your voice, and your support help keep these hidden stories alive. Far below those deck plates, in a compartment that did not exist on any official blueprint, Navy steel engineer Elias Mercer stood alone beneath a single yellow bulb. The light flickered softly as the ship rolled. Around him, massive steel plates curved inward like the ribs of a giant mechanical beast. This was not standard naval steel. He could see it in the faint crystalline textures along the weld seams. He had memorized every square foot of this alloy. He had created it. Years earlier, Mercer had been a civilian researcher working quietly on high-stress composite metals. His work was theoretical, dangerous to pursue at scale. One winter morning, men with Navy credentials arrived at his laboratory without warning. He was ordered to abandon his published research immediately. No explanation, no appeals. His notes were confiscated, his colleagues reassigned. By sundown that same day, he was on a military transport under armed escort. The project that followed was never given a name. It was listed inside Navy records as an unclassified materials evaluation that did not warrant doctrine approval. That phrase meant one thing in naval language. If it failed, it would be erased. If it succeeded, it would still be buried. Mercer's alloy was unstable to manufacture. Its internal bonding behaved unpredictably under heat and pressure. The Navy labeled it unfit for doctrine, too risky for widespread use, too expensive for fleet conversion, too abnormal to standardize. Then they built an entire warship with it anyway. On the night of April 14th, sonar operators sat in near silence, headphones pressed tight, eyes fixed on oscillating green lines. The sea was crowded with shadows, whale echoes, thermal layers, false returns. Somewhere beneath those layers moved German steel. A faint signal crept across the screen. Then another. The sonar technician's hand hesitated over the buzzer. Experience told him something was wrong. Training told him not to overreact. The signal spiked. The buzzer screamed. Torpedo in the water. The words ripped through the ship. Alarms howled. Men ran. Boots pounded steel corridors as the bridge ordered evasive maneuvers that came 1 second too late. The first torpedo struck the starboard side just forward of the engine spaces. The detonation slammed into the hull like a giant hammer from the depths. Deck plates buckled. Men were thrown hard against bulkheads. Lights exploded. Steam burst from ruptured pipes. The ship shuddered as if the ocean itself had grabbed it and tried to tear it open. Inside Mercer's sealed compartment, the impact hurled him to the floor. The yellow bulb went dark. For 3 full seconds, there was no sound at all. Then came the rush of water. But something was wrong. The flooding alarms triggered in only 2 adjacent compartments, not across the entire strike zone. Damage control teams raced forward expecting catastrophic rupture. Instead, they found the water entering only where conventional steel had been used for internal reinforcement. Where Mercer's alloy lined the hull, the steel had bent inward but remained sealed. It had flexed. It had held. Within minutes, the breach was isolated. Pumps engaged. The ship slowed, steadying itself against the crippled sea. Officers whispered in disbelief as early damage estimates came in far below expectations. The warship was still afloat. Down in the shadows, German sonar crews waited for the familiar sound of a breaking hull. It never came. What came instead was silence. Then the second torpedo was launched. It struck nearly the same location as the first, deliberately aimed at the weakened section. This time, the impact was closer to the waterline. This time, there were no internal reinforcements left to absorb energy. By every known naval calculation, the hull should have failed completely. The explosion flashed through the water like a brief underwater sun. Inside the ship, men braced for death. But the hull did not tear. It warped inward, slowly, like breathing metal. The alloy compressed under the shockwave, its internal structure shifting in ways no standard steel could. The steel shrieked. Survivors would later describe it as a sound halfway between a scream and the cry of tearing ice. And then it stopped. The water stayed out. Above the surface, the U-boat never resurfaced. Whether it was crushed by pressure, destroyed by feedback shock, or fatally damaged by its own detonation wave would never be officially determined. No wreckage was ever recovered. During the chaos of that second impact, as damage control crews fought to stabilize the ship, remember this moment, because what that steel did next should not have been possible. If you want to keep hearing the war stories that history forgot, stay with WW2 Frontline Legends. We uncover what others were never meant to find. In the quiet that followed, after pumps steadied and the crew realized they were still alive, Mercer forced his way into the sealed strike zone with damage control teams. What he saw there did not match any of his projections. The alloy had changed, not cracked, not fractured. It had reorganized itself along the impact curve. The molecular lattice inside the steel had compressed into a denser form, locking itself into a harder state at the precise moment of detonation. The impact had not weakened it. The impact had completed it. Mercer's hands trembled as he ran gloved fingers along the warped surface. His formulas had never predicted this behavior. His tests had never shown this phase shift. This was not reinforcement. This was transformation. It had evolved. And for the first time since the project began, Mercer was afraid of what he had helped create. Within minutes, sealed orders were transmitted from the bridge to command headquarters over encrypted lines. No distress signal was sent. No public report of torpedo contact was issued. The ship altered course quietly and continued forward as if nothing had happened. Up on deck, sailors stared at the Black Sea. They whispered the word ghost under their breath. 3 days later, without warning, Mercer would be summoned under armed escort to a closed tribunal, where photographs he had never taken would be laid across a steel table. Images that proved something impossible had occurred inside that hull. But for now, on this frozen Atlantic night, the warship moved on through darkness, carrying within its steel a secret that even its own creator no longer understood. And somewhere beneath the waves, German commanders would soon begin reporting an American vessel that should not have survived. A warship that refused to sink. 3 days after the torpedo strikes, the warship still carried the scars of impact beneath its waterline, hidden from the eyes of every man aboard except those sworn to silence. The crew moved differently now. Quieter, slower. The Atlantic was still hostile, but something else had entered the air. A sense that the ship itself was no longer ordinary. Elias Mercer felt it in every vibration beneath his boots as armed sailors arrived at his compartment door before dawn. No explanation was given. No salute was offered. Only a sealed order and the command to follow. He was escorted through corridors he had helped design, but had never been allowed to walk freely. The deeper they moved toward the heart of the vessel, the colder the air became. Steel walls closed in. The hum of the engines faded behind layers of soundproof bulkheads. At the end of the passage stood a compartment no rank insignia marked. Inside waited a tribunal. For naval officers sat behind a steel table bolted directly to the deck. No flags, no windows, no visible insignia, only clipped uniforms and eyes that did not blink when Mercer entered. Without greeting, one of the officers slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs taken inside the damaged strike zone. Close-range images of the warped alloy, the same steel Mercer had examined with his shaking hands 3 nights earlier. But these images revealed details he had not yet seen. Geometric fracture shadows glimmered beneath the warped surface. Not random, not chaotic, structured, intentional. Mercer stared at the patterns and felt his breath slow, because he recognized the architecture. Those were not from his equations. The lead officer asked one question and nothing more. "Explain why your alloy behaved this way." Mercer answered truthfully. He said the behavior was impossible under his models. He said the transformation phase had never appeared in testing. He said the impact had triggered an unknown reconfiguration in the lattice structure that he had not designed and could not yet explain. The officers exchanged silent glances. Another photograph was placed on the table. This one older, grainier, dated 2 years earlier. It showed the same geometric substructure forming within a laboratory plate under compression. Mercer's chest tightened. Only one other man on Earth had ever worked with those patterns. And that man was dead. If you are still with this story, follow WW2 Frontline Legends now and tell us where you are watching from. These are the moments history never finished explaining. The officer finally spoke the name Mercer had not spoken in 2 years. The name listed in Navy archives as deceased after an industrial explosion during early alloy trials. Mercer said nothing. He did not deny it. He did not confirm it. He simply stared at the photograph, as one might stare at a ghost. The officers informed him that the man officially died in a blast that reduced his laboratory section to molten wreckage. No body had been recovered. No remains identified. The Navy closed the file under classified fatality review. Yet the formulas were here, and the alloy inside the warship bore his mathematical signature. Mercer realized in that moment that his project had never truly been his alone. The tribunal ended without judgment. No arrest followed. No release was offered. Mercer was returned to his compartment under the same silent guard that had brought him. That night, the warship vanished from all active fleet registries. Its call sign was removed from convoy records. Its upcoming rendezvous points were quietly canceled. Crew transfers were reassigned under sealed orders that forbade discussion. When a supply vessel requested proximity confirmation, the reply returned only one word: unavailable. Officially, the capital ship no longer existed. Unofficially, it continued moving through hostile waters as if nothing had changed. German commanders began reporting something they could not easily explain through ciphered transmissions choked with doubt. A large American warship operating beyond recorded patrol zones. A vessel that took direct torpedo impacts and still advanced. A hull signature that returned sonar echoes inconsistent with known naval construction. Among U-boat crews, it earned a whispered designation, the Ghost Battleship. While the sea searched for it in darkness, Mercer returned to his sealed compartment with a weight he could not shed. If his former partner was truly dead, then someone inside the Navy had altered the alloy without his consent. Someone had completed a phase he had never approved. And if the man was not dead, then the project had never been under Mercer's control at any point. 3 nights later, Mercer found the message. It was folded into his bedding with absolute precision. No forced entry. No disturbed lock. A single scrap of paper carried nothing but a row of numbers written in graphite. To anyone else it was meaningless. To Mercer it was unmistakable. It was written in the shorthand only he and his former partner had used during their earliest private work. The numbers mapped to vector pressure thresholds. It was not a greeting. It was a continuation. If forbidden science and hidden war stories fascinate you, subscribe now to WW2 Frontline Legends. The truth often lives where no one was allowed to look. Mercer burned the paper at once using a brass heating coil. He watched the graphite curl into ash without leaving smoke. The numbers were gone, but the meaning remained. Someone was still running his equations, and they were doing so inside controlled Navy facilities without his oversight. Over the following weeks, the warship faced no further torpedo strikes, but the Atlantic continued to test it with storms that bent escort vessels into near failure. Twice the convoy scattered under submarine shadow. Twice the ghost warship passed through unharmed. Each time, Mercer inspected the alloy, and each time he noticed something colder than fear. The steel continued to change. Microscopic density increases formed along stress channels, even under ordinary cruising pressure. The material was slowly locking itself into a stronger state without further detonations. It was adapting. Naval doctrine had always treated steel as static. This was not static. This was reactive. One night, another message appeared. Same handwriting. Same shorthand. One sentence encoded in pressure vectors and heat coefficients. It decoded into a phrase Mercer had not written since before the accident. The second phase is stable. His hands shook as he folded the message. Because there had never been official authorization for a Phase 2. Phase 2 had been abandoned before funding approval even began. That meant someone had revived it without command knowledge, or without leaving records that the command could find. Mercer waited for summons that did not come. He waited for arrest that did not arrive. Instead, the warship altered course again under sealed transmission and moved into deeper operational darkness. And with each passing mile, Mercer realized something terrifying. Whatever had survived those torpedoes beneath the Atlantic was no longer just protecting the ship. It was becoming something new, something that might not be as controllable as they believed. And somewhere within Navy Command, someone was watching very closely. The final message arrived without sound. It was discovered at dawn, tucked beneath the rim of Mercer's inspection gloves. Folded so tightly it looked like part of the fabric itself. The handwriting was the same precise graphite pressure, the same angled stroke patterns, the same deliberate spacing that no one else in the research division had ever been able to replicate. Mercer did not open it immediately. Outside his compartment, the ghost warship moved through rolling gray seas under full radio silence. Storm clouds pressed low over the Atlantic. The escort vessels had detached hours earlier under sealed orders. Once again, the capital ship was alone. When Mercer finally unfolded the paper, he needed only seconds to read what had taken nights to encode. Phase 2 survived the test. His breath left him slowly. Phase 2 had never officially existed. It was a theoretical extension of the alloy's adaptive properties that Mercer and his former partner had once debated in whispers, long before the Navy ever became involved. It was a dangerous idea, an outlaw concept. Steel that could harden under impact was already revolutionary. Steel that could continue evolving afterward was considered unstable even in theory. They had buried Phase 2 in private notebooks and never submitted it for military review. Yet now it was alive inside the hull of a full warship. Mercer burned the final message as he had burned the rest. But some truths did not vanish with flame. They embedded themselves deeper than ink. Later that afternoon, the ship encountered its last recorded storm of the war. The Atlantic rose in towering gray walls that smashed against the hull with crushing force. Conventional steel ships in the convoy region radioed structural distress. Escorts were forced to reduce speed. Some lost steering in rogue cross-currents. The ghost warship, however, maintained course without deviation. Inside the sealed strike zone, Mercer observed something that confirmed what his instincts had already begun to fear. The alloy was no longer merely responding to extreme force. It was anticipating it. Stress channels inside the steel realigned microscopically even before major pressure thresholds were reached. The internal lattice compressed in advance of the wave's impact, hardening in preparation rather than reaction. No human-controlled engineering process could adjust at that speed. No mechanical system in Navy doctrine accounted for it. This was not reinforcement. It was learning. That realization marked the moment Mercer accepted that Phase 2 had crossed a boundary that could not be walked back. The steel was no longer a passive creation. It was now participating in its own survival. Command transmissions arrived that night encrypted across multiple bands and routed through non-direct channels. Mercer was not summoned. He was not questioned. But the ship's course altered once more under absolute secrecy. Days later, the capital warship slipped into a remote naval yard under blackout conditions. No public docking records were filed. No inspection teams boarded. The crew never disembarked. Fresh supplies were transferred dockside under armed guard. No outside personnel were permitted within visual range of the hull. The warship stayed 3 days. On the 4th night, it departed without log entry. After that, no confirmed operational sightings were ever released to the public. The ghost battleship vanished. German intelligence continued to reference it for months afterward in fragmented transmissions. A vessel that did not match known tonnage. A hull that defied calculated penetration curves. A ship that seemed to absorb punishment inconsistent with Allied metallurgy. Then the reports faded. The Atlantic carried on without it. Mercer remained on Navy payroll without assignment orders. He was transferred through a series of administrative posts that required no research and provided no laboratory access. Every transfer was signed under the same classification level. He was neither imprisoned nor released. He existed in the narrow space between usefulness and liability. The war ended. Files were archived. And most of what Mercer had known was sealed into storage compartments that would not be reviewed for decades. Years later, in the quiet of post-war reconstruction, metallurgists across several nations began encountering inexplicable anomalies during alloy stress testing. Samples that hardened instead of weakening under cyclic pressure. Materials that behaved as though they retained memory of force. No citations reference Mercer. No patents bore his name. No academic paper credited Phase 2. The phenomenon appeared as if it had emerged independently in multiple locations around the world. It bothered Mercer until his final years. The callback to the Atlantic never left him. The sound of that warped steel shrieking under torpedo fire. The way the hull had breathed inward and refused to break. The fact that something he never officially finished had survived its first real test in combat. On his deathbed, Mercer reportedly asked one final question to the naval liaison assigned to monitor him. Did it ever sink? No record exists of the answer he was given. What survives instead are fragments. Declassified convoy reports with missing call signs. Engineering files exhibiting altered molecular behaviors with no attributed origin. German sonar logs mentioning a vessel that should not have survived. And one sealed Navy archive subsection still restricted far beyond ordinary wartime classification. Files labeled only with a suppressed project identifier. No ship name. No inventor listed. Only a single unresolved annotation in the margin of an impact report, dated months after the war officially ended. Adaptive transformation confirmed beyond initial phase. Phase 2 did not die in the Atlantic. It merely disappeared from public history. Whether it was dismantled, replicated, or reassigned to another unidentified hull remains unknown. Whether Mercer's former partner truly survived the industrial accident or continued the work under deeper cover has never been officially resolved. And whether the ghost battleship still rests beneath classified steel today is a question the Navy has never answered. What remains is the memory of a night when a U.S. capital warship absorbed 2 direct torpedo hits that should have torn it apart. A night when forbidden steel defied every known law of naval engineering. And a reminder that some of the most powerful weapons of the Second World War never appeared in victory parades, never earned medals, and were never meant to be remembered at all. If stories like this remind you that history still holds secrets beneath the surface, Subscribe now to WW2 Frontline Legends and tell us where you are watching from around the world. Your voice keeps these forgotten chapters alive.